It reeks and it's a complete wreck. The post-protest clean-up at Parliament is costly in more ways than one. We're live in the capital talking to Wellingtonians regaining their city. And what do the people who supported and funded the demonstration think now? 1 million refugees have fled the war in Ukraine. We'll take you to the tiny Romanian town welcoming thousands across the border. Back home, Checkpoint visits a Taranaki school being drowned out by a cacophony of traffic noise. Bringing back the dead, we meet a scientists aiming to resurrect a long-extinct creature. And they're often written off as the dimwits of the animal kingdom, but lucky one sheep is busting the stereotype.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie. I'm Evie Ashton. Police have launched a significant investigation into the riot at Parliament yesterday, saying they'll find anyone who acted criminally. 100 people have now been arrested. They include 1 for arson, 1 for threatening to cause grievous bodily harm, and 9 for inciting violence. 11 of the arrests were made today for rioting, theft and assaults. Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers says they're gathering footage and information to hold people accountable for their actions.
It's a significant effort by police to be looking through all the footage that we have. Some of that footage is footage that we've captured. Some of that footage is footage that the public have already given us, that the media have given us, and we are very, very grateful for that support. It's incredibly important that we hold people accountable for the criminal behaviour that they demonstrated yesterday.
Richard Chambers says 40 of the more than 500 police staff in the operation were injured, ranging from bumps and bruises to bone fractures, head and chest injuries. Wellington Hospital says a small number of protesters presented with injuries, but wouldn't give any more detail. The Prime Minister is adamant that the responsibility for the violence at Parliament yesterday sits on the shoulders of those who were there. Protesters threw bricks, metal poles and ceramic plates at police officers as they cleared the precinct that had been illegally occupied for 23 days. The former Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, has taken to Facebook to blame Jacinda Ardern and other politicians for refusing to engage with the protesters. But Ms Ardern says the blame is not on her or any other politician.
The responsibility for what happened yesterday has to squarely sit with those who were here, with those who threw the LPG canisters onto the fire, who threw the bricks at the police, who chose to act in that violent way. The responsibility sits with them.
Jacinda Ardern says she stands by the decision not to enter into dialogue with those at the occupation. The Firefighters Union says police overstepped when they took control of fire hoses at Parliament grounds yesterday, and they want an independent inquiry. The union says after putting out fires, police ordered crews to hand over the hoses and started using them against the protesters. At one point, protesters got hold of a hose themselves. Union Secretary Watty Watson says firefighters were commandeered yesterday and ordered beyond their line of command. One of Ukraine's deputy prime ministers is warning the humanitarian situation in her country is deteriorating rapidly as Russian forces tighten their grip on the country. 870,000 Ukrainians are estimated to have fled the country since the Russian invasion started a week ago. Ola Stefanishna says most of Ukraine has been severely shelled.
Some of the smaller towns around Kiev, they are fully destroyed. People do not have access to clean water. People do not have access to food supplies. Hospitals do not have the proper amount of medicine. So the situation is very, very dramatic.
Meanwhile, it's been confirmed the Black Sea port of Kherson has fallen to the Russians. A strike by thousands of health workers tomorrow will not be going ahead in Auckland because district health boards have told the union they can't guarantee public safety. However, industrial action is set to go ahead for the rest of the country. PSA organiser Will Matthews says Auckland, Waitemata and Counties Manukau DHBs requested the union today not go ahead with the strike. Health workers in Auckland will picket during their lunch break. Half of the country's schools have had COVID cases among their staff and pupils in the past 10 days. The Education Ministry says schools and early learning centres have notified it of more than 17,000 cases in that period, including more than 5,000 in the past 2 days. Meanwhile, ministry figures show school attendance steadily declined last week, with 29% of children away from class on Friday and 50% of Pacific children. However, 9% were learning from home. 1 in 5 early childhood services had cases in the past 10 days, and attendance dipped to 69% by Friday last week. Daily community cases hit a new high today, 23,183. 503 people are in hospital, 7 in intensive care. Now to sport, and Paralympics New Zealand is disappointed about the decision not to ban Russian and Belarusian athletes from the Winter Paralympics in Beijing. The International Paralympic Committee has decided that athletes from the two nations can compete as neutrals, despite widespread calls to ban them following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A number of international sporting bodies have already banned teams and athletes from Russia and Belarus competing at events. Paralympics New Zealand Chief Executive Fiona Allen says they, along with numerous other countries, urged the IPC to institute a ban as well.
We're really disappointed. No stronger action to be taken. We understand that it was because of the legal and constitutional framework, and it is unfortunate that there can't be greater consequences.
New Zealand Rugby has confirmed the All Blacks' 3 tests against Ireland in July will be played in Auckland, Wellington and Dunedin. Hamilton and Christchurch will host tests against Argentina, and Eden Park will host the Bledisloe Cup game against Australia. The Black Ferns Pacific 4 tournament against USA, Canada and Australia will be played as double headers in Tauranga, Waitakere and Whangarei. Chelsea has advanced to the quarter-finals of football's FA Cup, beating second-tier Luton 3-2. Liverpool has also advanced with a 2-1 win over Norwich. Meanwhile, video game developer EA Sports is removing the Russian national team and all Russian clubs from the FIFA 22 game. That's the news.
Parliament lawn reclaimed.
These are abhorrent groups that I want nothing more to do with. I don't think they've got a place in a normal functioning democracy.
It's no bed of roses.
I was appalled by the level of violence I saw. It was just gratuitous violence towards officers doing their job.
Seeds of disinformation.
Throwing bricks at police and starting fires, that is a more radicalised core in engaging with this online disinformation. We haven't seen the last of them.
Time to get back to grassroots. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next, but first, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine apart from isolated showers about Northland and Coromandel Peninsula, clearing from Coromandel Peninsula by tomorrow afternoon. For Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumarunui, Taihape and Wairarapa, fine with high cloud developing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with cloudy periods, clearing tomorrow morning. For the South Island, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud developing this afternoon. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, Otago and Southland, mainly fine, apart from areas of morning and evening cloud. And for Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 7 minutes past 5. News headlines are at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katono, mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. From seat of government to sea of garbage, the mammoth task of restoring Wellington's parliamentary precinct is underway. Its lawn this morning resembling a bomb site with everything from discarded camp equipment and clothes to evidence of homemade flashbangs. Residents living nearby woke to relative calm after a day of chaos, saying any good intentions the protesters had were destroyed by yesterday's violent clashes. A total of 100 people have been arrested in recent days. 40 police officers have been injured. The operation has continued again, with police continuing to move on protesters from the area. Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe report.
The sun rises over the capital. Darkness dissipates, much like the violent hordes hours earlier. But what's left is a wasteland. Parliament's lawn pulverised from pristine green to garbage dump, the stench wafting out its gates and into surrounding streets.
It was really aggressive. I mean, I was talking over the fence to Mum and we couldn't hear each other. It was loud and our houses had smoke in them. It was smoky, really plasticky. It was really aggressive, really stressful.
Nikki Giles lives a few hundred metres from the protest's epicentre. For the first time in weeks, she's back into her morning stroll. No fear, no inquiry, no abuse for simply masking up.
I was walking around here in the first couple of weeks and people were friendly and it was okay, but in the last couple of, the last week and a half, it was really aggressive. We were avoiding the supermarket, avoiding shopping, basically avoiding going out in our own neighbourhood.
Her mum, Dale Knapp, lives here too, out for a walk. The backdrop, not exactly picturesque, but the atmosphere couldn't have improved more.
Having it on our doorstep was it just raised blood pressure, if you like, or just created this environment and atmosphere that we're not used to. We're used to this, being able to walk through Parliament and just having that beautiful environment of the trees and the hills.
I'm standing in the middle of Molesworth Street just outside Parliament. Yesterday, the scene of violent early morning clashes between police and protesters. Now, those protesters have, of course, cleared off, but they've left behind all of their belongings. I'm talking food scraps, we've seen shoes, we've seen clothes, and things like tents as well. The contractors are hard at work, and they tell us they'll be here for some time yet. And from almost all Wellingtonians we talk to, the message after yesterday's chaos is good riddance.
Their fight impinged on the rights of others. It made others feel unsafe in a place that we should all feel safe as the seat of democracy. All our voices should be heard, and they prevented other people's voices from being heard, and they didn't engage with the public in ways that engendered their trust or respect, and I just think it went way too far.
But some protesters remain around this city.
I really don't trust the media that much to talk to, but I'm giving you a bit of a chance here.
Don't trust the media.
Yeah, which is a bit of a challenge for me, so yeah. And yeah.
Sam, who sailed to the capital from Picton, sits as a lone protester on a bench in Wellington's deserted bus interchange.
I have nothing to protest with, but I'm still here, and I'm not going to, well, I'll probably go home tomorrow, but we'll manage. We'll take it to other places where they won't be able to hassle us.
Sam tells us he's peaceful and primarily anti-mandate, so I ask him how he explains the events of yesterday.
We were a community. We don't hold back people coming in and coming out. There were police coming in and out. We were, as long as they were reasonable about it and everything like that, we didn't have a problem with anybody coming in and out. That was all about community and welcoming people, and there's always going to be some people that have got a bit of a jolly thing that they want to have a go at the police and everything like that. It's natural, really. It's natural in life, and it's just what it is.
But the authorities' appetite for the few lingering protesters appears very low indeed. After talking to Sam, a commotion breaks out nearby as officers move a family on. It's one of multiple arrests inside the police cordons, a day removed from Wednesday's chaos. Outside the lines, a small congregation from NZ teachers speaking out with science picket passing traffic on Bunny Street. They're off to the court to challenge mandates for education staff. For some Wellingtonians, all of this points to a concerning level of division. Clinical psychologist Dr Paul Dignan lives not far from Parliament's deserted, desecrated lawn.
The big issue is not just, a bit of disruption to the people who live in this area, which is, slightly a bit irritating, but it's not. The big issue is really that the country, which has been known for a fair level of social cohesion, has got quite a disaffected group of people who are then, to some extent, consists of genuine people who've lost their jobs because of the mandate, sympathisers, but also other people with other agendas.
For others, it's more black and white.
Universal condemnation, disgust.
A city scarred, its residents rattled, hoping history never repeats.
And Nick Trubridge joins us now from Wellington. Kia ora, Nick. The businesses must be pretty pleased that they're back in business.
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. Look, pleased would be an understatement, to be honest. For those who aren't watching, I'm standing just outside Home Cafe at the end of Molesworth Street. It's pretty quiet here now, but yesterday morning Molesworth Street was the scene of some fairly full-on early morning stoushes between protesters and police. I've got someone with me who's pretty happy to see that it's been cleared up. This is Liz, who owns Home Cafe behind us. Liz, they don't need to take it from me. You can tell them. How happy are you that all of this has been cleared and that you're on the brink of reopening?
Yeah, incredibly relieved, actually. And so are our staff. Like, it'll be great. Yeah, because it's really 4 weeks for us, actually, that we've been closed. So, yeah, very relieved. It's been quite an emotional day today. Actually, I've been quite emotional. It's just kind of weird. I feel like it's like holding your breath, you know, and you just get going and you keep going, and then it's all gone. And it's like, yeah.
Absolutely. We've had lockdowns.
Yeah.
We've had that. We've had red traffic lights, down to orange, back to red. Now we've got protests, which have closed you as well.
Yeah.
Talk about impacts on this cafe. This is a really well-known cafe in Wellington, would usually be bustling with people either from the Central Library or just walking through. Impacts, and how has it impacted, I suppose, sustainability of the business?
Yeah, well, it's been horrific, to put it mildly, actually, and just sort of before the protests, we'd gone into red. I mean, this year has been, businesses have just been so down. It was pretty dire, and we were looking at our options, and then the protests came along and we closed down, and it was just like, you know, the straw that hasn't quite broken the camel's back, to be honest with you. Our staff, we've gone out to all our staff because we've got another couple of parts of our business not based here. We just simply were going to run out of cash by the end of March. And so we went to our staff and we asked them for the minimum hours that they could work, that they could afford to work, which is less than their contract hours, and they have been amazing. We've had a couple of staff who offered to work for nothing. We've had somebody who doesn't have to work constantly, so she's just said, call me when we're back on. But sadly, here at Home Cafe, we've lost 2 of our key staff, 2 full-time people in key positions. I think we've got one, the manager's still here, who's full-time, and the rest are all part-time. And the awful thing for us, it's just heartbreaking too, is that most of those people are actually students. So during the Christmas break, they rely on us to give them more work. So we usually are busy now, and so, you know, they can work almost full time, and they use that to save money for during the year because they don't get allowances over the Christmas break, so they've got nothing. So that's actually been really hard for them and for us. And I mean, I'm glad that we're getting to open now because I know that they're all looking for other jobs. So, you know, that's the next thing. It's like staffing, because we've lost some staff because we couldn't give them enough hours, and now we're losing staff left, right and centre for COVID. I mean, I've just heard we've got 2 people from the same household that work in our kitchen, which is off the site, not on the site, and they live in that same household, but another member of their household has just tested positive. So they're both going to be out for 10 days.
So, I mean, it gets, the protest is gone, but in a way it's the struggle continues on a different front.
Yeah.
And tell us, I mean, back to the protest itself. We were talking off camera before, and a number of Wellingtonians told us this in our video package that's just played. We used to protest on the Parliament lawn.
Yeah.
But this was different, particularly over the last week. What's your take?
Well, do you know, I didn't actually appreciate the number of protests that they used to have in Parliament until I sort of was hearing about it with this one. And that's because we don't even notice them half the time. Sometimes, I mean, you can hear them, and if you happen to be outside, you can see there's lots of people occasionally for big protests. Occasionally people will come in and they'll meet here before they go over there and protest, but it's just like another day, you know, it's no big deal. This has been terrible. It's been horrific. I mean, I think it just, yeah, I don't know. I just think I think I've said before that there's so many different groups, and clearly the tone had changed, eh? It's totally changed, yeah.
Hey, thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
open from Monday?
Monday.
Hopefully open from Monday, Wellingtonians, if you're listening to this and you're missing Home Cafe. Hopefully open from Monday. What should they come in and buy? What's sort of your
Cheese.
A cheese scone. Come in and get a cheese scone on Monday, hopefully, if you're passing through, because Home Cafe needs you. Look, do come back to us in a few moments, Lisa. We're going to go down to the law school. Of course, that was also being occupied by protesters as well. We'll have the president of the Victoria University Students Association.
Thanks, Nick. I hear they do an absolutely mean scone there at Home Cafe. That was Nick Trubridge joining us live there from Wellington. If you were listening in, don't forget you can check out the video from our two Nicks. It'll be on our webpage. Now, a quick traffic update. A warning if you were driving north of Auckland. State Highway 1 is blocked in both directions at Dome Valley. There's been a crash and an oil spill. Expect delays or try State Highway 16 if you need to get north of Warkworth. It is 20 minutes past 5. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. An intense bombardment is continuing in Ukraine's second largest city as Russia intensifies its attack, trying to tighten its grip on the country. Kharkiv has suffered heavy shelling and the city centre has become a wasteland of damaged buildings and debris. Meanwhile, Russia has taken the southern city of Kherson in the capital. In the capital, Kyiv, sporadic, explosions can be heard as a massive convoy made up of Russian military vehicles continues to grow in size, despite remaining stationary for some days. Andrew McRae reports.
The city has been pretty much ruined, and it seems like they want just to wipe us off the face of the earth.
That's Sasha, who lives in the city of Kharkiv. Victoria, who also lives there, describes it as living in hell.
There were bombs everywhere from the air mostly, and a lot of civilians were attacked and a lot of homes were destroyed, and we couldn't sleep.
Kharkiv remains under attack. Its mayor Igor Terikov says people are scared.
All over the city of Kharkov there are tanks fighting from all sides, and obviously this situation is very dangerous.
The mayor of Kherson, Igor Kolikayev, says Ukrainian troops are no longer in his city, only civilians trying to flee. He says the Russians are imposing a curfew and are planning to set up a military administration. Hussein lives with his Ukrainian wife in the Black Sea port city.
Today I woke up with a loud mechanical sounds and I thought something is not okay. I opened up my window and I see tanks just 10 meters away from my balcony and with a bunch of Russian soldiers. And they were shooting more like warning signs. They were shooting in the air. And civilians are just running, and that is one terrible thing that I've seen in my life, actually.
As Kiev experiences another night of wailing sirens, Lilia Romanova and her two children are sleeping in a bomb shelter, something they've done since the war began. She has no intention of leaving Ukraine.
We want the war to end. We want the women all around the world to see how terrible it is to sit in a cold basement instead of being in a warm house and not listening to the news because all the time it's bombed, killed. We don't want it. We want to live like normal people as we used to live. We hope that negotiations will lead to this as soon as possible.
One of Ukraine's deputy prime ministers, Ola Stefanishina, is warning of an impending humanitarian crisis.
People do not have access to clean water, to food supplies. Hospitals do not have medicine. So the situation is very, very dramatic.
Tonight, talks are due to resume between Ukrainian and Russian representatives, the second such meeting in the last few days. The US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is hopeful.
We'll support any diplomatic efforts by the Ukrainian government to reach a ceasefire and withdrawal of Russian forces. If there are diplomatic steps that we can take that the Ukrainian government believes would be helpful, we're prepared to take them, even as we continue to support Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
The International Criminal Court has formally opened an investigation into possible Russian war crimes in Ukraine, following a call from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Meanwhile, the majority of members of the UN General Assembly have voted in favour of a resolution condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine. While it's not binding, it's seen as a strong, coordinated global rebuke of Moscow's actions.
And we'll cross live to Siret, a tiny town in Romania, taking in refugees to speak to a World Vision aid worker after the 6 o'clock news. A tradie in Auckland says he knows about 25 people with COVID, none of whom have officially recorded their cases with the Ministry of Health. There are 23,000 new cases in the country today, but the tradie's experience means there may be plenty more out there. Rapid antigen tests are becoming more readily available today and have been picked up like hotcakes. Jordan Bond reports.
Omicron's ripping through the country. Everyone knows someone with COVID. This tradesman who owns a business has a couple employees away from work and bedridden.
Yeah, a couple. Actually, I would be stoked if I had a couple. I've actually sort of got around 7 or 8 of them actually out at the moment.
He says they won't even count towards the official COVID case numbers that come out at 1 o'clock.
So I asked the guys, if they're going to report their test, and they're like, oh, look, they're actually just sick. They just want to go to bed. They don't want to sit online trying to work out how to log in a case or just more admin.
He says the virus is widespread.
One particular construction site where a few of my guys were on, that's now just a sort of a ghost town. There'd normally be about 60, 70 people working there, and at the moment there's like about 5.
And he expects the actual number of infections to be a lot higher than the reported cases.
I don't know anybody who's recorded a case, and I probably know 25 people that have it. I think it's far more prevalent than what is going out there in the case numbers.
The man said all the cases he knows are isolating and following the rules, just not officially notifying the positive results. Figures from COVID modelling Aotearoa expect actual infections to be about 4 times the number of reported cases. Right now there are nearly 150,000 confirmed active cases. That multiplier would indicate there are around 500,000 actual COVID infections in the country at the moment. That's 1 in every 10 people. The higher rate in Auckland means it'd be about 1 in 5 people. The Ministry of Health has today made it easier for people to access rapid antigen tests. There's now a website. People can order free rats for pickup at a collection centre around the country.
And more than 65,000 orders have been placed online already. So you can think of that like a click and collect.
The son of RNZ reporter John Gerritsen tested positive today, so the rest of the family household went to get some tests.
How many people needed a test?
There are 4 of us. My son has just tested positive.
Okay, yep. So you'll be household contacts?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Oh my God, it's like a cute little pregnancy test for your nose.
They went home to take the tests and wait for the results.
Okay, that's the alarm. Have a look, guys. What have we got?
Well, they're negative. They're all negative.
A good result, but being household contacts, they still have to isolate for 10 days in case they develop COVID.
How do you guys feel about that?
I feel a bit annoyed because I'm isolating for no reason and it's all my brother's fault.
I think what it means is in a few days' time we need to do it again.
Shout out to my friends at school. I'm gonna miss you guys.
The family's had 1 test today and got given 2 more each, 1 for day 3 and 1 for day 10. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, does expect actual COVID case numbers to be higher than their official numbers show.
Well, it's very hard for us to know that. My sense is if people are motivated enough to go out and pick up a rapid antigen test, then they will generally be motivated to record that result.
Dr. Bloomfield says surveillance swabbing at hospitals and hospitalisation numbers mean they do have a pretty good idea of how widespread COVID actually is.
Now let's get to your feedback. This one on the protesters and the damage that's been left at the parliamentary precinct. This listener says they need to find out who was funding the protesters and make them pay for the clean-up. Well, we'll be speaking to someone who did donate to the protest. That will be after 5:30, so stay tuned. Now for a bit of light relief, sheep. They're written off as dim-witted despite scientific evidence to the contrary. So one sheep owner in Christchurch is out to prove once and for all that we've been underestimating the intellect of our woolly friends. Our reporter Rachel Graham and videographer Nate McKinnon went to meet Caroline Thompson and her very obedient sheep, Lucky.
Lucky, the 6-year-old sheep, originally from a farm in Burke's Pass, knows a few tricks. Oh, what a good boy. In fact, he knows so many tricks that his owner, Caroline Thompson, keeps track of them on a list.
Does sit, bow, turn, back, shake, jump, stay, pose. Pose is his favourite. He loves pose. through, so he'll go under something, wait, go to bed. Now, go to bed he learnt by getting feijoas. Now, feijoas is his most favourite food, and if you give him a feijoa, it's instant, whatever he does.
Lucky follows 29 commands, including here, fetch, up and down the stairs, roll over, weave, goal and walk the plank. Caroline says his training began when she noticed him sitting down beside her and decided to see if he'd do it on command.
So I just had a fistful of willow leaves, I think, to start with, and said sit, and then he'd sit and he'd eat his leaves. And then, just from then on, every trick, every command that I wanted to give him, didn't take long. It would probably be a day, 2 days, and he'd cotton on to, what it was I was trying to get him to do, and away he'd go.
Caroline took Lucky in as a newborn 6 years ago, when his mother wasn't feeding him. She says by the time he was 6 months old, he'd learnt about 15 commands.
And I haven't really taught him anything new for quite a long time, but he's remembering what he has learnt. And it's quite amazing, really, because, I'm not talking to him all the time or getting him to do the tricks all the time, but he does remember the word. Sit, sit. What a good boy, well done.
While Lucky's skills might seem out of the ordinary, Caroline thinks most sheep could be trained if their owners had the inclination.
I think it suits people to think that they're dumb. I mean, you wouldn't eat them otherwise. So, there's whole paddocks full of these amazing, intelligent animals that it suits people not to think that they're bright.
Beyond his broad repertoire of tricks, Lucky also enjoys lawn mowing duties and long walks along the riverbank. With feijoa season just around the corner, it might be a great time to give sheep training a go.
Tauke, awesome. Lucky is amazing. If you are listening to that on radio, please go to our webpage and check out the video of Lucky doing his tricks. Kia ora, e te iwi e haere aki nei e a checkpoint. So what do the people who funded the protest at Parliament think now? We go live to the tiny Romanian town welcoming Ukrainian war refugees and the Taranaki school that can't hear itself think for all the noise. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Let us know who you reckon should pay for the damage at Parliament. That's the result of the protest and the clean-up, I suppose. And also whether you think we need to fence off the area. Have we been a little naive? Do we need a big fence and a gate there? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anei a iwi mina pitipiti kōrero.
The police are promising that the major investigation being launched into the riot at Parliament grounds yesterday will find anyone who carried out criminal acts. 40 police officers were injured, with 8 requiring hospital treatment. 100 people have now been arrested and face charges including arson, rioting, theft, assault and inciting violence. The Assistant Police Commissioner, Richard Chambers, says footage and information on the incident is now being gathered. Firefighters are accusing the police of overstepping their authority by taking control of hoses at Parliament grounds yesterday. Union Secretary Watty Watson says the police need to be properly resourced to undertake their own operations. Roads into Auckland Domain have reopened after protesters were removed from their campsite. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says while the right to protest is fundamental to democracy, no one is entitled to camp at the Domain and use vehicles to obstruct access to the area. The Supreme Court has upheld the convictions of the first ever person to be convicted of human trafficking and slavery in New Zealand. In July 2020, Joseph Matamata was sentenced to 11 years in prison and ordered to pay $183,000 in reparations to his victims. He was convicted for bringing Samoan citizens to New Zealand on the promise they would earn big money, then using them for his own financial gain. District health boards have succeeded in getting tomorrow's strike by thousands of health workers called off. They say the employment court has ruled in their favour. And evacuation orders have been issued to 500,000 people in northeastern New South Wales due to extreme flooding. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet says things will get worse before they get better. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa anai ko Nicholas Poynton, who joins us to talk business. Nicholas, so who's kind of diving out of Russian investments at the moment?
Yeah, well, this is an announcement that came through today. It's the super fund ACC, the government superannuation fund. Now, older listeners may remember that's the pension scheme for the old pension scheme for public sector workers, and the National Provident Fund. Now, they say they will sell any direct holdings of Russian sovereign debt or shares in majority Russian state-owned companies. Now, this is confined to companies that are linked to the invasion, they say. It's not a blanket exclusion of companies that just happen to be headquartered in Russia. They say this action is in line with the international response and sanctions that have been placed on the Russian Federation. It's believed that these foreign investors hold about $100 million worth of Russian assets. But how much of that is actually linked to the invasion is unknown. From speaking to the super fund, they say they have about $6 million worth of assets that they're looking to divest, which truly is a drop in the bucket for the super fund. It represents about 0.02% of the total size of their portfolio. But this action does raise a number of questions, such as how do these investors divest these assets when the Russian share market has been closed since the invasion began, and also those sanctions that have been placed on the country's central bank have also made exiting Russian debt difficult as well. You also have to wonder what sort of market there will be with these assets, given that in the eyes of many they're seen as being distressed, having very little value. So look, what will this actually achieve? It's hard to say. It will definitely send a message, and I guess in a time of a global crisis you've got to be seen doing something.
And Nicholas, who are these punters who are dashing to get gas guzzlers before the fee-bait scheme comes in? Have they not seen the price of petrol?
Well, look, I think it looks like people's love affair with utes sort of outweighs how much it may cost to actually fill them up, because we've just had the strongest February on record for new car sales, and that's believed to be driven in large part by people flocking to buy their beloved utes before the clean car discount is actually in effect, but the new fee-bait scheme for gas guzzlers comes into effect at the beginning of April. We saw 12.5 new car registrations last month. That's a 50% increase on the year earlier. The top cars were, unsurprisingly, the Ford Ranger, the Toyota Hilux, followed by the Mitsubishi Triton, the Mitsubishi Outlander, and then on fifth spot, the Tesla Model 3. So the clean car discount been in effect for a while. It really is supporting demand for EVs. Down in 10th spot, we also saw another, the MG ZS. So the Motor Industry Association believes that the heat we are seeing in the market at the moment will cool once that new tax does come into effect.
And Nicholas, shall we take a wander through the market numbers for the day?
Yeah, the NZX is up 1% today to 12,211. The dollar trading at 67.7 US cents, 92.8 Australian, and Brent crude oil has hit a new 9-year high, $116.70 a barrel.
Thank you, Nicholas. That's Nicholas Poynton with Business News. Ka kite. The post-protest clean-up at Parliament will come with a hefty price tag in more ways than one. Police moved in yesterday to clear out the tent town and its occupants after they say those with good intentions were outnumbered by those willing to use violence. And what started as an anti-mandate, anti-vax demonstration ended with protesters being pepper-sprayed and police pelted with paving stones, bricks, paint bombs and tent poles turned javelins. Visitors to the occupation site had included Winston Peters and Sir Russell Cootes, and Red Stag CEO Marty Very provided some funding to demonstrators, and he joins us now. Kia ora, Marty.
Good afternoon, good evening.
Hey, what do you think of the way things ended here, the violence and also the destruction that has happened in the parliamentary precinct?
Oh, look, personally, I think it's appalling what happened there. Like you said just before, and the police commissioner said, it just got out of hand. I was like one of the 30% of the people, a couple of weeks ago that supported the concept of the message that the protest was trying to get through. Gave a small personal donation, but I haven't been at all impressed with the way it's evolved over time, and I think the sort of a dangerous fringe got in there and started to take it over, and I think it lost the support of the public.
You gave a small donation. It was about $250 from memory. Is that right, Marty?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Okay. Do you regret giving that money, given the way it's panned out?
Yeah, with hindsight, I wouldn't have done it. The background to it is, my friend went down there with his family to try to get his wife's teacher job back. And I offered to give them some money because they're doing it pretty tough. And he said, look, no, don't. He was a proud guy. He said, look, don't give it to me. Give it to these organisers. They're looking after keeping the place clean, looking after the waste, looking after the rubbish, and looking after the toilets. And so, gave me a website. I gave $250 to help, keep the place tidy. But in the last couple of weeks, it's got completely out of hand. Although I did just look at the website, and there's still donations going in there. There's 44 pages of donations, so there's a lot of people giving to it.
So, Marty, now when you look at it, do you accept that there was a violent underbelly in that group and that there are kind of extremists and conspiracy theorists in the mix there, even if not everybody fits that definition?
Oh, absolutely. And when I spoke to my friend, and several other groups of friends were down there as well, in the beginning that there were, he was describing that there were police officers, defence force, nurses and teachers in that group, trying to get their jobs back. And so it definitely changed over time. I look, with hindsight, great thing, but I think, spraying them with water and music and just, that probably just brought out the troublemakers and thought, here's a fight, let's get down to Wellington. I think, kind of went from there, and I think it sort of lost the support of the public. I got interviewed by Sean Plunkett on the platform last week, and I said, look, I think it's run its course. They need to go home now.
So, okay, can you just be quite specific, Marty? At what point did you think, I'm feeling a few regrets about giving this money and voicing support for the protest? At what point did it turn for you?
I just thought as soon as it got to the point where there was a kind of an element in there that wasn't really there for the purpose of the mandate, and as soon as it got to that point, you could sort of see the public's opinion turning off the protest, and as soon as the public's opinion turns off the protest, then the government can easily just stop listening because they don't have to have, they're not forced to sort of listen to the public anymore. But I wanted to sort of make a donation just to sort of help get the message across that there has been regulatory overreach, and it was quite good to see the court come out on Friday and say that at least the police and defence force that the mandates were unlawful. And obviously the other point I was making in my article in the Herald, which is the key point, was that I was the first person to crunch the numbers to show that the traveller isolation was now completely redundant on health and economic grounds. And so I argued very much for the reopening of our tourist industry straight away. It's an $18 billion industry, but also, the farmers and factories, they need their people in to pick the fruit and run the factories. The universities, they need their international students. Hospitality is desperate. I've got so many friends that are hurting that, sometimes, even though it's not my industry, sometimes you just got to actually do something.
So, Marty, in respect of that, because I understand, you made the case for tourism and the border opening up, right?
Yep.
The government's timeline right now remains the same. They're saying they might bring it forward, but first wave of tourists are not until July. So do you think that this protest actually achieved anything?
Well, first and foremost, the protesters were supported by the High Court last week. And secondly, by the end there was a huge upswing of sort of support voiced to me, but also in the media during last week, as last week evolved, in support of eliminating isolation of the borders. And by the end of the week, Ashley Bloomfield was saying, yes, it's inconsistent with our domestic policy. And on the Nation on Saturday, the Prime Minister was saying she's seeking urgent advice on how quickly after the peak the borders can be opened up for no isolation at all. And obviously that's what the tourism sector needs. If there's isolation, it's dead. And so the previous forecast, which was only made on the 11th of February, the previous forecast was to open the borders to tourists without isolation in the second half of the year. And so, and obviously now that's now been completely, reversed, and the Prime Minister is now going to open those by the sounds of it shortly after the peak of the pandemic. So,
okay.
So I went into bat for that sector, run the analysis. I was the first to publish that, and the rest of the media came in behind it, and now it's a no-brainer.
Marty,
so I do expect that to happen.
So now, where we find ourselves with the front of Parliament absolutely demolished, it looks like, there are graders in there tidying up the filth that was there. Do you reckon you might kick in some money to put it right down there?
Yeah, look, first of all, we just come back to the efforts I've done to sort of restore the $18 billion a year tourism industry. But if there's a need for some timber down there, I'm sure I can ask my company to see if we can help out there. I have a bit of swing there. We give away a lot of that product to charities and conservation and sports club and local iwi.
So you could potentially help rebuild the playgrounds then, or something else down there.
Yeah, wherever we can help. I mean, we give to all sorts of good causes, and obviously our Parliament grounds are a good cause. What one doesn't want to distract from the personal responsibility of the people who did the damage, obviously, and just judging by a lot of the ones I saw on the television, chances are they were funded more by the government's benefits than by anybody else contributing to the organisation down there. Personal responsibility has to go on those people who did it and who have been arrested. I'm a concerned member of the public. Happy to, if I can provide some timber and help out down there, then that's definitely what I'll do.
Thanks for talking to us this evening. That is Marty Very, who is the Redstag CEO there. And as he said, he made a small donation to the protesters at the time they were down there. While the clean-up got underway on Parliament's front lawn, party leaders were calling for those involved in yesterday's violence to be held accountable. The grounds are still closed to the public, with much of the lawn still being treated as a crime scene. The grounds of Parliament carries the scars of the 23-day occupation and the actions taken to break it up. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
After the chaos and drama of yesterday, a shocked calm has settled over Parliament. Heavy machinery trundles across Parliament's lawns, clearing the debris from the occupation.
Look, you can see the scale of the destruction from a distance, but up close it's something else to see it all together. And yeah, as I said, it looks a lot like a dump.
This afternoon, the Prime Minister, her Deputy Grant Robertson and Speaker Trevor Mallard ventured onto the forecourt and lawn to survey the damage.
Removing the last of the burn them? Yeah, just removing the last of the sign.
What does that one say?
It says, I deserve to be in a rubbish bin.
Several police ended up in hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, and dozens more were injured. Among the ranks of police yesterday were about 80 new officers, their second day on the job. Some of the more experienced officers spoke about what it was like on the front line protecting Parliament House.
Molesworth Street yesterday was pretty full on.
Yes,
yeah,
it was.
quite scary, yeah.
So from what time? You were at the beginning of the day?
We started at about 4:30 yesterday morning, and what time we finished? About 11 o'clock last night, but
the only business inside the House today was from party leaders who roundly condemned the occupation, thanked police, the Māori wardens and other emergency services, and called for New Zealand to move forward.
The smell of smoke has faded, the playground will be restored, and the people, our people, will return to their place.
The competing imperatives of safety and public accessibility must continue to be carefully balanced.
I was standing at that window and watching people being harmed at the front line, including police. I was watching humans being harmed, and that rocked me.
Yesterday, the grifters and the charlatans, the political opportunists and the white supremacists who were behind the protest melted away like cowards and abandoned the field to the desperate people that they'd led astray.
We have to ask why so many people felt that the society had abandoned them, that they had so little to lose, that they would occupy Parliament and central Wellington for 3 weeks in a protest that everybody agrees is different from anything that we've seen before.
I speak to you now as a son, a brother, a mokopuna, a whanaunga, and as a father. The threats, the abuse, the hate towards us members of this House is absolutely unacceptable, and this is not who we are.
There's no dollar figure yet on what it will take to restore and reinforce Parliament and its grounds, but it will be in the millions. It will include much more robust security, and maybe, as one silver lining, the playground on the lawn may come back bigger and better.
The Parliament protest quickly spilled out onto the streets around the Beehive and planted itself on the doorstep of Victoria University of Wellington. A glass frontage of the Pupatea campus was smashed in during the chaos last night, and a skip outside was set on fire. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us now from the university. Nick, so how is it looking there?
Hi Lisa, well, a stark contrast to last night really. Of course, I'm at the intersection of Featherston Street and Bunny Street. If Nick pans just behind me, I'm just going to explain it for the people that are listening rather than watching. We're panning down towards Bunny Street. On the right of the shot I have the Pupatea campus at Victoria Uni. Now that was where that glass frontage was smashed yesterday as the protesters started retreating back from the Parliament lawn. On the left of the shot we have the law school. Now that was the site of a fairly large gathering of protesters over the last 3 weeks. I'm just looking in there now and there's still quite a lot of debris in there. The grass around the law school, it's completely dead. Unfortunately, when the law students do eventually get back, they won't be coming back to beautiful grounds and pristine grass. But I've got with me the president of the Victoria University Students Association, Ralph Zambrano. Ralph, thanks for joining us. Let's talk to the protest, of course, first of all. Now, speaking to protesters today, they still maintain that they come in peace, the ones we've spoken to, that is, and put yesterday's commotion on a few outliers. Based on your conversations with your executive, with your students, what do you say to that? What has been your interpretation of it?
We know that it's a really small number of protesters who've caused a lot of harm to our university community, that caused all that disruption that we saw unfold yesterday. We know that a large number were actually relatively peaceful, that they were just being present because they had valid reasons that they had been impacted by the COVID-19 and the introduction of the vaccinations and the mandates. And we know that COVID-19 has left everyone affected to some regard, and we know that they've been affected. But we know that it was that small number, that really small number, who went out and caused that disruption, that damage that we now see at our campus.
In terms of what you're hearing from your members, of course the students of Vic Uni, how have they been affected over the last few weeks? Obviously, you know, in terms of access, they've been affected, but just walking through town, what sorts of things are you hearing?
A number of our students have been vulnerable and then been put in positions of harm. We know that students have been spat at, they've been jeered at, they've been called out for simply wearing a face mask, doing things to keep themselves safe, keep others safe, keep everyone safe. And we know that it hasn't been a safe position for them to be in. We know that staff members as well have also been jeered at. They've been put in a really vulnerable position just for doing simple things.
Talk to us about that action yesterday, Ralph. You would have seen it on the live stream. You might have even come down here, I'm not sure. But what was going through your head as you watched it?
I was speechless. It was a surreal feeling watching everything unfold, just seeing all the scenes happening, the anger, the frustration that was all unfolding on our university premises as well. I think it was a sad day for our country, for our university to also be brought into that space. And I just hope that we move forward better and stronger together from that moment.
Yeah, sad day for the country indeed. Hey, thank you very much, Ralph. Lisa, as for what's happening here, there has just been a little bit of activity around us, actually. A few protesters came and hung out down at the concrete blocks. Obviously, far less than yesterday. We had a helicopter whirring overhead before, but it looks to have cleared right off again. Police have just put up police tape behind me, actually. But as I said, stark contrast to last night.
Thanks, Nick. That's Nick Trubridge joining us live from Wellington. The final shipment of crude oil is on its way to New Zealand, with the country's only refinery about to close. It will arrive at Marsden Point this weekend. All future shipments will be carrying refined oil processed offshore. It's the last delivery despite global uncertainty over oil pricing and supplies driven by the conflict in Ukraine. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The arrival of the Torum Ingeborg at Marsden Point this weekend is the beginning of the end for Refining NZ, the last ship to ever deliver crude oil here, with shutdown of the refinery to begin in a couple of weeks. The Energy Minister, Megan Wood, says despite global oil uncertainty following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the government is not reconsidering the refinery's future.
We're keeping very close to this and monitoring the situation, and all the advice we're getting back is that there is not a threat to New Zealand's physical supply of oil.
A meeting between the Minister and her international counterparts this week decided to release 60 million barrels of oil currently held in reserve, largely into Europe. Supplies in New Zealand, she says, are secure.
Most of the Southeast Asian refineries, of which we'll be getting our petrol, don't use Russian crude.
She's seeking advice from oil companies, MB, independent consultants and international counterparts. But keeping the refinery open isn't on the cards.
Well, of course, in order for us to refine oil here, crude needs to get through as well, and it's crude that's setting the price at the moment. So either from a physical supply or a price, the argument doesn't really stack up there, because the price of crude will flow on to refined if you're buying that.
Despite the assurances, not everyone is convinced we're sitting pretty. Sustainability Council Executive Director Simon Terry says New Zealand has long supply lines for fuel delivery, and yet it keeps far lower reserves of fuel than other countries.
So if the tankers stop coming for any reason, we typically have just 20 days of diesel onshore. And until we decarbonise trucking a fair bit, it's only diesel that can keep food on supermarket shelves. So keeping the refinery going actually would provide a way to ensure we always have at least a minimum amount of fuel on a perpetual basis. And so we could keep our essential services running that way.
Russia is the world's second largest exporter of oil, and while Terry says the situation isn't quite a perfect storm, the invasion of Ukraine is already having an effect.
It gives you a time to think, well, what would happen if for some reason those tankers stop coming? How well prepared are we, and what would it cost to keep that refinery open now? Those questions are even sharper now than they have been before.
There's also concern about how the oil we do have access to will be transported around the country. Craig Harrison of the Maritime Union says countries are already securing their supply chains, including tankers.
And if we look at the size of New Zealand and our geographic location, we're miles away from some of the refineries that we're talking about getting fuel from. So most of our refineries, I'll get the refined product, will be from Asia, Korea and such, or Singapore and places like that. It's a fair way to come to New Zealand. As we've seen in other supply chain issues with container fleets, that once they become constrained, the prices go up quite quickly.
He says we're relying on oil companies to charter vessels to get the fuel around.
We haven't seen much from the oil companies to actually test their planning. We've just seen some light document put out by Z, but there's nothing to really scrutinise it. So we've got quite a bit of concern, actually.
Refining NZ says it's due to wrap up by the end of the month before taking shape as channel infrastructure, which will store refined fuel only.
A Taranaki school says it can't open some of its windows as the noise of traffic speeding along the highway outside is thundering through classrooms. Emont Village School sits on State Highway 3 between New Plymouth and Inglewood. It's joined local residents calling for a speed reduction in the area. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Rob Martin went to see what the fuss was about.
Emont Village nestles under the shadow of Mount Taranaki, about 11 kilometres south of New Plymouth. The primary school, with a roll of about 170, is famed for its daffodil bed planted by soldiers on their return from World War I. But its idyllic scenery comes with an ugly downside: noise. It's a problem junior team leader Bev Mulder is all too familiar with.
Well, it's very noisy for any of the classrooms along the front of the school. Most of the time we keep the doors and windows closed along the front of the school so that we don't have to talk over the noise, which is a real shame because it would be a beautiful area.
Ms Mulder says the current COVID guidelines, which insist windows are opened, has highlighted the problem. Currently the speed limit through Emont Village is 70 kilometres an hour. She'd like to see traffic slow down.
The traffic going, a lower speed limit would help, and we're also looking at some hedging along the front of the school to help block the noise, which will obviously take a while to grow.
Jenny Colson has lived next door to the school for 40 years. She says the village has grown massively over that time.
We have a very busy intersection with Mount Taranaki. Up there we have a huge industrial area down the bottom of Egmont Road, and a lot of big vehicles and trucks go down there overnight. And we have a school on the corner with 177 children and rising. We have a cafe, a garage and other businesses, and the whole situation is becoming really dangerous.
Ms Coulson is clear about what needs to happen.
Ultimately, we would like to see a 50k area. We would like to see the signs extended 500 metres north and south so that the vehicles have time to slow down to 50k. We would like to have a digital sign that states your individual speed, because I believe they're the most effective tool in making people think about the speed they're doing.
An online petition calling for these changes had 900 signatures in just a few hours. Chook's Trailers is across the road from the school. Co-owner Melissa Bedford had no hesitation signing.
I would like to see the speed slow down. I think if the cars were doing 70k would be a good start. It's already a 70k zone, but I don't think many of them do that speed. And certainly a roundabout at the intersection would be a huge advantage here.
Mums on the school run were clear something needs to be done.
Especially turning right, and they've been waiting there for a lot longer than you coming straight forward, and so they just go. So it's not safe in that instance.
So Quinn being in one of the junior classes last year, there was definitely a noise issue from that, yeah.
A lot of the time you do see a lot of people don't slow down to 70 and are still doing 100 through. So yeah, it does become quite tricky and quite dangerous.
Waka Kotahi acknowledges noise is an issue at Emont Village School. It's currently reviewing speed limits and safety measures on roads in Taranaki. Depending on the results of that review, it says new speed limits could be enforced on State Highway 3 by the end of the year.
Do check out Robin's video. It'll be up on our webpage. A lot of feedback coming in on Marty Very from Red Stag, who made a donation to the protesters. This person says, is Marty Very trying to rehabilitate his image?
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. Police say the force used by staff at yesterday's riot was proportionate to the situation, but will look into any reports that suggest otherwise. A major investigation has been launched into events yesterday at Parliament grounds, including reviewing video footage. So far, 100 people have been arrested. 40 officers were injured, ranging from bumps and bruises to bone fractures and head injuries. Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers says the response from police was necessary.
Police staff confronted with a very violent situation yesterday, people who had remained on site here with the intent not of protesting but in fact in terms of their violent behaviour, and so the force used by police was obviously proportionate, but we will certainly look at any situation that suggests otherwise.
Richard Chambers says all 8 officers admitted to hospital have now been discharged. The Assistant Commissioner doesn't have a total for the number of protesters hurt. Richard Chambers says where medical support was required, it was as available to protesters at the site as it was to police. He says he can't comment on any admissions to hospital in regards to protesters or others there yesterday. He thanked Wellington Free Ambulance officers for their support yesterday. Wellington Hospital says a small number of protesters presented with injuries, but wouldn't give any more details. A company head who gave money to the Parliament protest says he was appalled at what he saw happen yesterday. Red Stag Chief Executive Marty Very says in hindsight he wouldn't have given about $250 to the protest. He told Checkpoint it just got out of hand. Marty Very says a couple of weeks ago he supported the concept of the protest message, but he wasn't at all impressed with the way it evolved. He thought it got out of hand as soon as the tone of the protest moved away from being against mandates. The city of Kherson has become the first major Ukrainian city to be taken by Russian troops. The city of Mariupol along the Black Sea coast has come under sustained attack. The mayor, Vadim Boychenko, made a recorded address.
Residents of Mariupol, today has been the most difficult day, the most complicated day, and the most cruel day of all the 7 days of the war. Today, the Russian forces, just wanted to destroy us all. But our esteemed armed forces of Ukraine gave a fitting rebuff to those people who fired at our residential buildings. Unfortunately, we are without light again, we are without water again, we continue to remain without heat.
Powerful explosions have also been heard once again in the capital, Kyiv. The Director General of Health wants more people to get their booster shot as COVID-19 cases rapidly rise. Nearly 1 million eligible people have still not had their third vaccination. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says vaccination is still the best defence against ending up on a hospital ward.
And the hospitalisation rate for people 12 and over who have had a booster is only a fifth of the rate for those who've not had any vaccinations. And yesterday, in terms of booster doses, nearly 18,000 were administered across the country.
There were 23,183 new cases in the community today, with 503 people in hospital. A strike by health workers planned for tomorrow has been called off after an employment court ruled in favour of district health boards. About 10,000 health workers from the PSA planned to walk off the job after failed pay negotiations. A DHB spokesperson says Omicron is putting extraordinary pressure on DHBs and the focus of the whole system should be on caring for patients. They say the DHBs want to settle pay talks quickly so they can address pay equity. The Employment Relations Authority has set down facilitation between the union and DHBs for early next week. And evacuation orders have been issued to 500,000 residents in northeastern New South Wales due to extreme flooding. Communities from the Hunter Valley to Sydney are being warned to prepare for heavy rain and possible flooding. The Hawkesbury River has peaked at 12.2 metres. State Emergency Service spokesperson Phil Campbell says the river was expected to peak at 14 metres, and while the fact it hasn't is good news, there's still uncertainty.
It will still mean a significant number of rural properties and some streets will be flooded around parts of Western Sydney. So very important, if you have been asked to evacuate your property, that you do so.
And in the Lockyer Valley, west of Brisbane, the flood-battered town of Grantham is again in the firing line. Authorities have issued a fresh alert for thunderstorms and more rain. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Bronwyn Hayward on the future shape of our cities in a changing climate. Pub culture professor Lorna Piatti-Fennell on the rise of video streaming, which may just have killed the TV star, and its spring school bag hunting season in Japan. And our correspondent Motoko Kakabayashi needs to start looking now if she's to have the right bag for her son when he starts school next year. That's right, next year, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine apart from isolated showers about Northland and Coromandel Peninsula, clearing from Coromandel Peninsula by tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumarunui, Taihape and Wairarapa. Fine with high cloud developing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with cloudy periods clearing tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud developing this afternoon. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, Otago and Southland, mainly fine apart from areas of morning and evening cloud. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e hono mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The southern Ukrainian port city of Kherson has been overrun by Russian troops. The mayor says invading forces are on the streets and have forced their way into government buildings. Other key cities are being hit with sustained shelling. Hundreds are feared dead. Meanwhile, US officials are warning Russia will increasingly hit civilian targets. And the International Criminal Court has opened an investigation into potential war crimes by Russia. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Ukrainians are fleeing over the border, some to the northern Romanian town of Siret. Former journalist and now World Vision aid worker Mike Bruce is in the town and joins us now. Kia ora, Mike.
Kia ora, Lisa. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. But what are you seeing with people coming over the border where you are?
Oh, well, look, the scenes are, incredible. I don't really say it. It is just extraordinary. I see now we're up to 1 million who have left the Ukraine. Most are going into Poland and into Slovakia, but we're seeing now, a steady stream coming into Romania or into Moldova and then into Romania. So we're talking about 400 people an hour crossing that border crossing where we are. It is currently snowing. It has been for about 3 days. It is when I say cold, it's not Invercargill cold. It's top of Aoraki cold. It is absolutely freezing. It is it was -8 yesterday. And again, these people are coming across, the border with literally suitcases and backpacks and heading into this. And then, either the sort of different modalities, I guess. Some are staying in Romania. Others are moving on to other Eastern European nations, sort of using Romania as a transit point, moving through to the likes of Hungary, into the EU, into Bosnia. So I haven't got updated figures today, but we're talking about 105,000 have come into Romania or registered in the last 5 days.
So are these mainly women and children, given that men of fighting age have basically been ordered to stay in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's the other very astonishing scene. There's so many women with strollers, babies, swaddled in big blankets. It's heartbreaking to see what the conditions are coming in. It really is. Males are generally older, so it's young women and children. And we spoke to a woman yesterday who from the western part of Ukraine, so not yet affected by fighting. That day her husband had decided to go and fight, so he went to eastern Ukraine, and in her words she said, my heart wants to save my country, but I have to save my daughter. She was travelling with a 9-year-old girl, and I'm not kidding, she had a pack on her back that was no bigger than a day pack, and they had one each, and that's they're literally just chucking stuff in a bag and going.
And are they driving over the border, Mike? Are some of them walking? I mean, how are they getting here?
Yeah, this is why a lot of them have come to the Romanian crossing now, because getting into Poland, there are large queues. It's a much longer walk to get to that border point. Here, at this stage, many of them are driving very close to the border crossing and then just walking across, and then they're from there really deciding what their next option is.
So this is a tiny town you're in, right? Are there the resources there? Who's putting these people up? Where is the warm bed and the roof over your head coming from?
That's a really good question. It's a mix of things. As I say, some are getting on buses or other forms of transport and then just moving on. The town where we are staying, which is about 20 minutes from Suret, I'm in a hotel here with, it must be, I think, 80% Ukrainians. They've just come here, put the credit card down, and are just staying here, for the time being. They've set up like a temporary playground downstairs for the children. Some are moving on, as I say, through into other countries where perhaps they have family or friends. A lot of Romanians have opened their homes to these people, and some are in temporary shelters and camps around Suret. So yesterday we visited a sports stadium that had been sort of converted to house these people, and but there are literally tents and no heating in the tents. So it's pretty miserable, especially in this weather.
So these are the people who are getting out, and then we shouldn't forget that there are people who are stuck there and children, and obviously World Vision has a focus on kids. Apart from physical injuries, there's also the mental trauma. I mean, what's being done in respect of helping these kids?
Yeah, yesterday we saw a lot of kids a lot of kids in tears. They were very distraught, and we've assembled a group of 45 psychologists, Ukrainian-speaking psychologists, and they're kind of rotating, helping kids with psychosocial support, mental health, well-being. That can't be underestimated. Obviously, there's, we're doing food, water, and sanitation distribution, but also very conscious of that, psychosocial support for kids. We had an incredible story this week. World Vision had facilitated the removal of about 40 kids from Kiev who were orphans and whose centre was bombed. So they're in Bucharest, and Ukraine didn't transition out of institutionalised care for orphans like other countries. So they've got a very high number of these kids, and that's another concern. That there's potentially up to about 1,500 kids who may have to be brought out for their own safety.
So they don't actually have
again,
families, Mike?
No families, no, exactly. So, orphans in the truest sense of the word, yes. Yeah.
So the scale of this is enormous and ongoing.
It is. Look, the estimates, some estimates are saying 4 million, some are saying 5, but then there's a lot of internal displacement as well. So people moving from, highly affected areas, high conflict areas to other areas of Ukraine itself. So we've got internally displaced, and you've got externally displaced people who are, essentially refugees. Again, up to 5 million. Now, to put that in context, at the height of the Syria situation in 2015-16, we were talking 1 to 1.5 million. So this is the biggest since World War II, potentially.
Mike, people sitting on the other side of the world might feel pretty powerless to what's happening in this situation. I mean, can they help? What can they do?
Look, the best thing they can do is support. Try and support appeals, try and support the work of NGOs, responding to this crisis. And if I can get a plug in, I would say go to worldvision.org.nz and look for the Ukraine appeal page there. Look, donating is currently the best way of supporting these people. And, if people can be bothered, I guess, lobbying your local MP for perhaps, a special vote of humanitarian aid for these people.
Really appreciate your time this evening, Mike. Thank you for joining us. That is Mike Bruce, a World Vision aid worker who's in Siret, which is in Romania, right on the border with the Ukraine. He said there are about 400 people, mainly women and children, crossing that border every hour. It might be happening on the other side of the world, but the economic shockwaves of the Russian invasion of Ukraine will reach New Zealand. Tightened oil and gas stocks out of Russia is leading to increased prices worldwide, hiking the cost of air and sea freight. Grain, wheat and fertiliser prices are also rising, which could lift meat and dairy prices. Oh, and keep an eye on your KiwiSaver. Emma Hatton with this report.
Russia is a small fish in the New Zealand trade market, but it's a key player globally, in particular oil, gas and wheat. The president of the Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Federation, Chris Edwards, says effects on New Zealand companies and in turn consumers are certain.
It's almost immediate. So there's a thing called BAF. BAF is short for Bunker Adjustment Factor, and it's basically a fuel surcharge that the shipping lines charge. I'd expect fairly soon, if it hasn't happened already in some markets, a thing called an emergency BAF being introduced by shipping lines to cover the rapidly rising price of oil.
And it won't just be fuel prices putting pressure on the cost of doing business. There's congestion and the inability to access some ports in the region, as well as the looming prospect of cybercrime.
Maersk, one of the world's biggest shipping lines, were attacked themselves back in 2017, rumoured from Russia actually, and it shut their whole shipping system down around the world, and it caused carnage to the supply chain, and that was pre-COVID. I think one of the concerns we have in the supply chain is if that happens again.
Oil prices are up 22% since the beginning of February, likely to lead to further hikes at the pump, despite global efforts to boost reserves and keep a lid on volatility. Nick Tuffley, ASB's chief economist, says other commodity prices are also on the rise.
We are starting to see some impacts on food prices. So we've seen a bit of upward pressure on wheat prices this year. And we've also seen overnight that the dairy trade auction has firmed as well. And part of that could well be driven by the perception that it will become more expensive to feed livestock in those parts of the world that rely on grain.
George Weston Foods, which produces bread brands including Tip Top, Bergen and Ploughman's, says the wheat price hikes aren't having an immediate impact on production because they mostly source from Australia and New Zealand. However, as Michael Harvey from Rabobank explains, price pressures are likely to eventually hit.
We've already seen benchmark pricing for some grains and oilseed markets move higher, and then there is that risk that starts to drag higher, wheat prices in the local market here in Australia. So that can be good news for croppers in this part of the world, but for buyers of grain, that can be problematic.
He adds the upward cost of grains used heavily for livestock feed in other parts of the world, but not New Zealand, could give farmers here an international edge.
That's good news in terms of the milk price that farmers will get, and they're not as exposed to supplementary feeding markets as in other parts of the world. So that's certainly a positive picture around all this.
And in amongst the repercussions, consumers are being reminded not to lose their heads as KiwiSaver balances are also hit by volatility. Global share markets have gyrated wildly since the invasion as investors weigh up the financial and economic fallout. The Financial Services Council Chief Executive Richard Clippen says people should avoid switching their fund type in response to the uncertainty as they risk locking in their losses.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. More than 500,000 New South Wales residents have been urged to evacuate their homes as river levels continue to rise. New South Wales is being hit by broad areas of thunderstorms as a severe weather system continues to batter Australia's east coast, worsening the flood situation. In Queensland, the flood-battered town of Grantham west of Brisbane and communities along the Logan River are also being evacuated as the rivers continue to rise. Residents had only just returned to clean up after last week's flooding. Glenn Lauder reports.
A town in Queensland's Lockyer Valley, already grappling with devastating flood damage, is again being evacuated. Residents in Grantham had only just returned after being forced to flee to higher ground late last week when floodwaters inundated the town. Severe thunderstorms hit the region overnight and again today, with indications water levels in and around the town could rise rapidly and close exit routes. The Lockyer Valley Regional Council has activated the town's flood siren and police are door-knocking homes in low-lying areas. Kathy Mann is a resident in Grantham.
The siren in Grantham has just gone off twice, alerting people to get out now to move to higher ground in case Grantham floods again.
Peak outflows from Sydney's Warragamba Dam are now expected to be well below levels experienced during the floods of last March. Water New South Wales says less rainfall than predicted's fallen over key Warragamba catchments, resulting in the peak spill forecast being downgraded. But flood levels could still be below those March 2021 levels.
And it is 20 past 6. It was another day of record COVID-19 infections with 23,183 new community cases reported by the Ministry of Health. Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says it's infecting younger Kiwis.
We're continuing to see a large proportion of our current cases are under 30 years of age. And of the cases announced today, 54% are under 30 years of age, with just 14% over 50.
503 people are in hospital with the virus, 7 are in intensive care. While under 30s may be more likely to catch COVID-19, it's older New Zealanders who are ending up in hospital.
Of the 345 people in hospital in the northern region, where we have the best data, and those who are not in ED there, so these are ones who are on wards, just 21% are under 30, while around 60% are over age 50.
The takeaway, well, it's pretty simple. Get boosted.
And the hospitalisation rate for people 12 and over who have had a booster is only a fifth of the rate for those who've not had any vaccinations. And yesterday, in terms of booster doses, nearly 18,000 were administered across the country.
But Dr Bloomfield says that still leaves 938,000 eligible people who have not yet had their third shot. It's also bad news for the unvaccinated few.
The rate of hospitalisation is 5 times higher for unvaccinated people compared with people who have had their booster dose.
After 2 years, Western Australia's hard border has come down with about 8,000 people expected to fly in during the next 2 days. Vaccinated people flying in from overseas can now land in Perth without having to do hotel quarantine. The ABC's Isabel Mossali reports.
When the pandemic began, Tracy Cunningham was living in Phuket. She lost her job, she tried countless times to get back to Perth, and when her mum died, she had to watch the funeral online.
Last July, I was booked to come back. I was going to move back to Australia. So I sent all my belongings back. And then 2 days later, I got my flights cancelled again. And the next flight available was February 22. Obviously, that's cancelled. And now it's March.
She's excited she'll finally be seeing her family, but the past 2 years has brought huge stress.
I was a little bit surprised that they weren't allowing residents back in.
For anyone stuck outside WA, the tight border restrictions were a nightmare. But in WA, it's been a largely popular move. life continued almost COVID-free as people got vaccinated. More than 60% of people over 12 have had 3 doses. Dr. Mark Duncan-Smith is the WA president of the Australian Medical Association.
So what's happening here in WA right now with Omicron at 1,000 cases a day is a social experiment that has never been done in the world. And so what we're hoping for is that we will get a very, very soft landing and hopefully our hospitalisation numbers will stay very low, and that will be testimony to the effectiveness of those borders over the last 2 years buying us that time.
He warns WA's hospitals are still understaffed. However, he believes the system will cope when the state hits the government's predicted peak of 10,000 cases a day.
If that is correct, and it should be, then the hospital system should cope because the actual hospital admission rate with that will not flood our medical system. Now, it is certainly beholden on the McGowan government, and this is why we're stepping up the restrictions this week, to ensure that we flatten that curve of peak so that we do only end up at 9,000 to 10,000 cases a day, because if it does blow out, well, then our medical system may be overcome.
The Ukrainian government says at least 2,000 civilians have died in the bombardment inflicted by Russian airstrikes. Despite the destruction, the death and the fear, Ukrainians remain resolute and ready to fight to the death to defend their country. CNN's Matthew Chance has more.
Russia's assault on Ukraine continues without mercy. In the port city of Mariupol, also the scene of heavy shelling, local officials say hundreds of casualties are now feared. The United Nations has confirmed more than 500 civilian casualties across Ukraine in the week since this Russian invasion began. Ukrainian officials say the figure is much higher. You'd think those figures would scare people off the streets. This scene from the town of Konotop, where a Russian officer holds up 2 grenades for protection after delivering an ultimatum demanding surrender. Shame on you, the angry crowd shouts. Just go back to where you came from. Minutes later, the local mayor sets out Russia's terms. If we start resisting, they will shell the city, he tells the crowd. But if you vote for it, we will fight back. The decision has to be taken by everyone, though, because the artillery is aimed at us, he warns. Across Ukraine, there continue to be courageous acts of civilian defiance against the Russian occupiers. This was a scene in the southern town of Melitopol, now under Russian control. Locals literally lying in front of military vehicles to resist. And there's resistance on the battlefield too. Russian officials admitting nearly 500 of their own soldiers have been killed so far. Ukrainians say the figure is closer to 6,000. Either way, the human cost of this war is already tragically high.
The Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich has announced he plans to sell the English football club Chelsea. He's been under mounting pressure from British lawmakers since the invasion of Ukraine. But despite the move, many are noticing that he still hasn't condemned the Russian aggression. The BBC's Laura Scott reports.
There wasn't even time to tell the players before the news broke that after nearly 20 years owning Chelsea, Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich has decided to sell. In a statement, he said he felt it was in the best interests of the club in the current situation. He said he'd instructed his team to set up a charitable foundation where all net proceeds from the sale will be donated, and this would benefit all victims of the war in Ukraine. Abramovich said he wouldn't be calling in the £1.5 billion the club owes him, but for some there was a gaping hole in what he said.
There's still no condemnation from Roman or the club about what's happening in Ukraine.
Abramovich's departure is a seismic moment, but not entirely unexpected, coming after mounting calls for the government to sanction him.
He's a person of interest to the Home Office because of his links to the Russian state and his public association with corrupt activity and practices.
Abramovich has always denied doing anything to warrant sanctions, but some will see this as an attempt to secure the club's future before any possible sanctions come his way. Chelsea have been transformed into a footballing force under Abramovich, winning 19 major trophies. Little wonder then that some Chelsea supporters are sad to see him go.
Absolutely gutted, mate. But he's done it for the right reasons. We know he has.
British government made him put a target on his back and everybody's on him now.
Obviously it's very sad. It's very sad what's happening in Ukraine. But at the end of the day, I think football comes second, doesn't it?
Abramovich has already been approached by potential buyers, but will he get the £3 billion he reportedly wants for the club?
I think that is unlikely to be achieved, but if you are looking for a trophy asset, something to show off to your compatriots, to your friends, then Chelsea has an awful lot of attraction.
Chelsea celebrated another success tonight, but as bidders swirl around Stamford Bridge, questions do too over how this club will fare as it enters a new era.
And let's get to some of your feedback. A lot of you loving Lucky the sheep. This is the sheep that does a whole manner of tricks. This listener says, Lucky reminds me of Harold, that most dangerous creature, a clever sheep. Monty Python and the Flying Sheep skit, my favourite, says Anna in Tauranga. And a shout out to the Home Cafe in Wellington that hopes to open on Monday after the protests have cleared out. Anne says they do a fabulous walnut cream sandwich biscuit. Wow, all the elements. What's there not to love in that? Keep across late news tonight. The team will bring you all the updates. If you missed anything on the show, check out Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find Checkpoint there. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up. They'll be talking to the Cricket World Cup Chief Executive as the big tournament gets underway. Have a fantastic evening, and we'll catch you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The police have established a crime scene around Parliament as an investigation is launched into yesterday's operation to remove protesters from the area. Protesters have also been cleared from Victoria University's Pipitea campus today, and a clean-up is underway. Health workers are angered by the Employment Court's decision to call off a nationwide strike tomorrow. And the final shipment of crude oil is on its way to New Zealand, with the country's only refinery at Marsden Point in Northland about to close. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.